We often think that to really know something, all you have to do is, pile up the facts, you read the book, memorize the details, and boom, you're an expert. A walking encyclopedia. But our deep dive today really pushes back on that whole idea.
It really does. It forces you to look past that intellectual checklist. The material we're digging into today, it pulls from sources like Watchman Nee and the raw experiences of people like Paul, Job, and Elijah. And it suggests that divine knowledge isn't just about having the information. It's about having a profound transformative
Which is
experience.
a huge shift, right?
Yeah.
Especially if you're used to learning in a straight line. So our mission today is to unpack this really complex idea that true, deep understanding of the divine, it goes way beyond the intellect. It requires something that's difficult, even painful. It requires surrender, or what these sources keep calling the path of the cross.
Exactly. And when they say path of the cross, they're not just talking about, a historical event or a doctrine. They're describing a whole way of living, a framework. It's about intentionally giving up control, letting go of your own strength, and allowing something else to guide you.
Okay, so let's start with what this kind of knowledge is not. It's not just checking a box. The person who really knows God isn't necessarily the one who's read the Bible 7 times or has 30 years of study under their belt. Those things are good, but they can still be, well, superficial.
And that's insight one, right there. Knowledge has to be transformative, not just theoretical. It's not something that just sits in your brain. It's something that fundamentally remolds you. It shapes your character. If the knowledge hasn't changed how you actually live your life, then it's just data. It leaves, and this is a quote, no more room for superficiality or shallow faith.
I like that focus on transformation. It really sets the stage for where the real learning happens. And it's not on a quiet library. It's in the mess. Watchman Nee makes this really practical point, that no one can know God without having transactions with him. I think that word choice is fascinating, transaction.
It is, isn't it? It's transactional knowledge. Think about it. A transaction is an exchange. There's usually some cost, some friction, and our sources argue that the real knowledge of God is exchanged right in the middle of our difficulties. Every chaotic moment, the phone that won't stop ringing, the unexpected bills, that feeling of loneliness, that is the site of the transaction.
So you're saying we should treat everyday crises as classrooms?
Precisely. The sources warn us not to let these difficulties just, pass us by, not like leaves that fall to the ground and are swept away. Every single pressure, every struggle, it's an opportunity to learn something deeper about God's character.
That really flips the script. Because when chaos hits, our first reaction is, where is God in this? Why me? But this material suggests the question is actually the other way around. It's not, where is God? But are we willing to find him right there in the middle of it all? It puts the responsibility back on us.
It demands an active response, not a passive one. Do we see God's hand shaping us, teaching us patience, maybe exposing our need for trust while it's happening? That's the whole challenge. We can't wait for the storm to pass to find him. We find him in the fight. And usually we find him right where we are weakest.
That immediately brings the Apostle Paul to mind. I mean, if you're looking for a case study of knowledge gained through exactly this kind of suffering, he's it. He's the one who wrote, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness."
And the context of that line is so important. Paul was not, sitting in a quiet room meditating. He was in deep distress over what he called his thorn in the flesh. He hated it. He begged God 3 times to take it away. He wanted the problem to just gone.
And I think we can all relate to that. We pray for the quick fix, the instant healing. We want the thorn pulled out.
We do, but the sources highlight that God's answer was no. He denied the relief Paul was expecting, and instead, he gave him a revelation. He gave him this understanding of sustaining grace. The weakness itself became the doorway for God's power. That was the deep knowledge.
So for anyone listening who's dealing with their own thorn, a chronic illness, a job loss, maybe that deafening silence of God, these are the moments where we're actually being invited to go deeper.
And this brings us to insight, too. True knowledge requires active surrender. Paul's response in the end was to say, "Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses." Now, we often misunderstand that kind of surrender.
How so? It sounds a lot like resignation,
Yeah.
just giving up.
And that's the key distinction. It is not passive resignation. It's not throwing your hands up and saying, well, I guess this is just my life. It's an active surrender, a conscious, deliberate choice to hand over the problem and your need to control it to a greater power. Resignation comes from exhaustion. This kind of surrender comes from confidence in the one you're yielding to.
So that path of the cross is less of a metaphor and more of a continuous psychological discipline. It takes real effort. It
Yeah.
means being willing to lose a piece of yourself, your pride, your certainties, your desire to be in charge.
It demands persistence. Which brings us to the third big idea. Knowledge requires endurance. This isn't a one-and-done kind of thing. The sources point to the story of Elijah, who was desperate for rain after a long drought.
And he prays for it.
He prays, but not just once. He sends his servant to check the sky. There's nothing. He prays again. He did this 7 times before his servant finally saw a tiny cloud. 7 times.
7 times. That's incredible tenacity. If we're being honest, most of us pray once, maybe twice, and if nothing happens, we just assume the answer is no.
Right. And the sources challenge us with that story. How often do we give up before we've even given God a chance to respond? Or before we've shown that kind of persistent faith? True knowledge is often found in the sustained act of seeking, not in the sudden answer.
But the path isn't just about repetition. It's about enduring things that expose us. Watchman Nee talks about passing through the fire of God's treatment. That sounds intense.
It is. The idea is that God allows situations into our lives that are designed to show us what we're relying on instead of Him. This treatment exposes the weaknesses in our character, our hidden faults, and especially our false securities. We think our securities in our job, or our health, or our reputation, and the fire shatters those things.
It sounds like a kind of spiritual deconstruction. He shatters us not to destroy us, but to rebuild us in His image. So the process has to be painful because our carefully built self is being taken apart.
Absolutely. And where does this often happen? In the silence. The material points out that God doesn't shout over the noise. Our world is just so full of distractions and notifications we can't hear anything subtle.
And that silence can be terrifying. When you're in a real trial and you're desperate for a word, the silence feels like rejection, like absence.
Yet the sources argue that the silence isn't absence, it's an invitation. Look at Elijah again. After the wind, the earthquake, and the fire, God wasn't in any of them. He was in the gentle whisper. And you have to be still to hear that.
You have to stop fighting against your circumstance.
Precisely. That verse, "Be still and know that I am God," is framed here as a command, a mandatory posture for the restless soul. We have to silence our own demands and expectations before we can hear His majesty.
And this whole difficult process, the chaos, the surrender like Paul, the persistence of Elijah, the dismantling in the fire, it all leads to something. It leads to a profound transformation. And the ultimate example has to be Job.
Job is crucial. He went through the entire cycle, lost everything, suffered immensely, but he kept seeking God. He refused the easy answers his friends gave him. He just wanted an audience with God.
And when God finally did speak, the sources point out, He didn't give Job the neat explanations he was looking for. He didn't give him a list of reasons. He just revealed His own majesty and power.
It was a revelation of being, not an explanation of why. And Job's response is the final proof. "My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you." That jump from hearing about something to seeing it for yourself, that's the leap from theoretical to transformative knowledge.
That's insight 4. Seeing knowledge is transformative. So what happens when our eyes finally see in this way?
The sources claim that our deepest fears start to lose their grip. The pain doesn't just disappear, but it takes on a different weight because you see that you're part of something so much bigger, so much more eternal. The suffering gets put into a new context.
And what's the end result of that, the
Yeah.
state of being? Because it sounds exhausting, but the outcome should be rest.
Right. It leads to the peace that Paul described, the peace of God which transcends all understanding. And this peace isn't about the absence of a storm. It's about the presence of God in the storm. It's how Paul could say he learned to be content whether he was well-fed or hungry. It becomes independent of your circumstances.
That contentment is the living proof that the knowledge is real.
Exactly. And crucially, you don't go through all this just to keep it for yourself. It has to flow outward. We're dealt with by God so that we can become His instruments. We can only comfort others with the same comfort we ourselves have received.
You can't give away something you haven't lived through yourself. So the pain, the fire, the persistence, it's all meant to make us able to relate to other people through a new lens.
Our whole perspective shifts. We start to see people not through our own anxieties, but through the eyes of Christ. And that's the ultimate sign of this transformation, when our relationships start to reflect that Christ lives in me.
Okay, let's try to synthesize this whole journey for you. We started by challenging the idea that knowledge is just about facts.
And the core takeaways are pretty clear. First, knowledge is transactional. You have to seek God in the chaos of life, not after it's over.
Second, it requires active surrender. That means moving beyond just giving up and instead deliberately placing your weakness into a higher power, like Paul did.
Third, it demands persistence. That continuous faith-filled effort like Elijah and enduring that fire of God's treatment that dismantles our false securities.
And finally, this whole process leads to seeing knowledge, that deep, transformative moment Job had, which brings a peace that can't be shaken and empowers us to serve others.
The lesson under all of this is a constant invitation to let go of self-reliance. Our competence, as Paul says, comes from God.
It's about stopping the fight to be the boss of our own lives and yielding to his process, knowing his strength shows up most clearly right where we are weakest.
So we'll leave you with this final thought to explore on your own. If our true competence comes from God, and our greatest strength is found when we are weak, what pretense of control, what self-sufficiency, what pride, what deeply held certainty are you holding on to today that might be blocking this transformative, seeing knowledge? What do you need to let go of to truly start seeing?